Good morning, everyone. Wow, yeah, okay, this is great, yeah. Y'all feel how I feel too. It's all good. It's very early. Welcome. I'm going to be talking about re-implementing deprecated HTML elements with web components. Yay! If you want to learn about custom elements, this is the place to be. If you have no idea what a custom element is, this is the place to be. We're good. All right, so first we're going to talk about me a little bit because I'm important. I'm not. My name is Alex Riviere. I am a senior front-end developer for Traina Design. I am a co-host of the Enjoy the View podcast. I am also a Twitch streamer. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday and make terrible things. I am also a co-organizer for the Atlanta Vue.js meetup as well as PyATL. So if you're ever in Atlanta and you want to talk to a bunch of nerds, find me. I will hook you up. So first off with this talk, I was inspired and I need to take you on a bit of a journey. So the first part of this talk is going to be story time. So let's take a trip back, all right, shall we? Now, this is going to cover a very specific period of early internet history. And we're going to have a brief history of the early internet. More specifically, I want to talk about 1995. At the end of 1995, we have sort of two browsers competing with each other. You have Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. Some of you may have heard of that. Some of the younger people in here may not have heard of those before. Sorry. The HTML 2.0 spec is published. Now, the standards body is unable to keep up with what the browsers are doing. And so in the HTML 2.0 spec, it's very standard stuff. We still have a lot of it today. But the browsers start implementing things that they're like, we need to be able to style things. We need to be able to have like different fonts. We need to be able to have like different colors, we need to be able to have different whatever, and so they start implementing a bunch of different tags and stuff like that. There's also a competing standard to HTML, or a standard that goes along with HTML called cascading style sheets. I don't know if anybody's heard of that standard before. It is finally published, and the first browser to implement CSS is Internet Explorer. In 1996. So you'll notice between November of 1995 and August of 1996, there's a several month period where people don't really have an official proper way to style things. And so we get some weird stuff out of that period of time. The standards bodies finally catch up and they're like, okay, cool, let's document everything that the browsers have implemented so far. Right? Let's just go ahead and document everything. And in January of 1997, the HTML 3.2 specification is released, which basically says, here's what the browsers did. Now, this is the time period that gave us some tags that are much beloved to many people, such as the marquee tag, the blink tag, the font tag, the center tag. There's a whole bunch of things in there that is just like fantastic stuff. So the problem is that, like I said, browsers move in a little bit faster than the standards bodies can keep up. So the standards bodies come in, and in December of 1997, so less than a year later, they release the HTML 4.0 RFC. This is sort of the initial publication of that. And in that, they get rid of all of those tags that we really like marquee, font, center, all sorts of stuff. They're like, use CSS, don't use these. Simultaneously to all of this, though, another story is happening. In the middle of 1995, a company is formed called Beverly Hills Internet. Now, this company is a startup. It's based in Beverly Hills. Don't know if you can figure that out. It offers some unique things. It gives 2 megabytes of free web hosting to its users. When you get this free web hosting, you would join a neighborhood. So each of the neighborhoods were sort of themed. There was sort of a theme you were trying to fit with, right? There was like Area 51, and there was like Silicon Valley, and right, so you had all of these sort of neighborhoods, and it really focused on the community aspect of like the internet and making websites. And in late 1995, BHI rebrands itself to GeoCities. So this is happening simultaneously with this explosion of interesting and weird tags that the browser vendors are making, and people are trying out new things and putting things out there and just being really creative with like, what can we do? Now, for those of you who don't know what GeoCities was a beautiful place where we had wild, interesting, mildly horrifying web design things happening, and it is a very specific style. When you say a GeoCities website, it immediately evokes a certain aesthetic appeal to it. GeoCities sadly closed down. It was eventually bought by Yahoo. Yahoo shut it down in 2009. However, it is archived, and in fact, a really fantastic place to find all of the gems of GeoCities is cameronsworld.net. If you want to explore more of this stuff, please go there and see many, many, many examples of what GeoCities design looks like. All right, so that was our history lesson. We're going to jump forward a little bit, and we're going to continue to talk about standards, because it's super interesting. And in 2013, this is the earliest reference to it I could find. I've been told it may be as early as 2011. We have a new proposal called Custom Elements. You see, back in the day, the browser vendors, they all started making HTML elements. And ever since then, we've been trying to be like, what if we could make our own HTML elements? So they made a proposal. Here's how we can do it, right? And it went through several iterations and various things. There was HTML imports, and that went away. There are a bunch of people who are angry about that. And ultimately, custom elements landed in all browsers by 2018. The only thing that it doesn't support is Internet Explorer, which if you are still using, don't. So because it's supported in most browsers in 2018, we can probably use this in 2022, right? This is now sort of ubiquitous. It's available in everything. So now we're going to jump ahead again. We're going to go and jump ahead again. This is more recent history. Last year, I got bored and nostalgic. And I was like, what if we were able to take like the classic HTML 3.2 elements that you're not supposed to use anymore, and what if we remade them? But we made them better, right? Like, there's a lot of problems with the older elements. They're not being kept up to date. They're not actually very accessible either. So I did that. This is GeoElements. It is a library of custom elements that I have made that re-implements various deprecated HTML elements using custom elements. It does a lot of really terrible things, but more importantly, it makes them all better. The marquee tag and the blink tag now prefers reduced motion, which is a media query that you can use for people who have vestibular disorders, where a lot of motion can cause them to be motion sickness or other things. They can now turn off the motion, but it still works. And the font tag that I have, it automatically imports Google fonts for you, so you can type in whatever Google font you want to, and it just automatically adds it to the page. Great, so I've made this thing. GeoElements is fantastic because it allows you to experience the joy of HTML3, that period of GeoCities where everybody was creative and just doing whatever they wanted to, however they wanted to, because why not? It lets you focus on the HTML part without having to focus on the CSS or on the JavaScript. You just sort of like do stuff, right? Also, it's probably a really bad idea. Don't use this in production. So now what we're going to do, because I've implemented all of these, we are going to talk about how to make your own custom elements. And we're actually going to re-implement 3 of the tags that we love so much. And we'll make some of them a little bit better. So let's dig in. Now, the first one that we're going to focus on is the blink tag. For those of you who don't know what the blink tag does, it makes things blink. They just flashes, right? That's what the blink tag does. So every custom element starts off with this magical incantation, which is class blah extends HTML element. That is how you make a custom element. That is the first thing that you have to do. You have to extend an HTML element. Now, you can extend other elements. There's a way that you can do that. It doesn't work in Safari. Don't at me. It just doesn't. So stick to this. It'll work in anything. So for those of you who don't know ECMAScript 6 class syntax, this is what it looks like. When you are making a JavaScript class, the first thing that you do is that you make a constructor. And within our constructor, the first thing that you call is super, which calls its parent thing that it's extending, and make sure that that constructor runs as well. The next line is this .attach shadow. Now, I am not going to go into the eccentricities and complicated nature of the shadow DOM, but I will explain it briefly because some of you may not know what shadow DOM is. Shadow DOM is DOM. Well, first off, let's talk about DOM. The DOM is the document object model. When you are doing things in JavaScript and you want to interact with the document, with the page, that is the DOM, right? Shadow DOM is a thing that exists in but outside of the DOM. So the easiest way to explain this, we've had Shadow DOM for years. It just hasn't had a term and we haven't had a way to mess with it. But imagine a file input on a page, right? You're making a form, you go input type equals file, right? That does not just give you like a text box. That gives you like a button and there's text and then you can like drag and drop things on it and it does a whole bunch of stuff. And it's very hard to style all those things, and that's because they exist in the Shadow DOM. You don't have access to it. You have to go out of your way to style it. But it is there, and it is accessible, and it is usable. So this allows us to make our own Shadow DOM where people cannot touch things. Now, the nice thing about Shadow DOM, styles don't leak in, and styles don't leak out. So if you've ever had problems where you're like, I can't get this CSS to work because my styles are being applied to this thing, and if I touch this thing, then this thing moves, and like whatever. Shadow DOM kind of eliminates that. It encapsulates all your styles, and you say, this is where the styles apply. And that's what we're going to be primarily using it for. There are 2 modes that you can attach Shadow DOM in. You can attach it in both open mode, which allows other people to interact with your Shadow DOM via JavaScript from the outside. There's also closed mode, where people cannot interact with your Shadow DOM from the outside. I tend to stick to open because I'm nice like that. The next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to add 2 elements to our thing. We're going to create a style element. We're going to create a slot. What is a slot? I'm glad you asked. Thank you. A slot is a special element used in custom elements that allows you to say, hey, anything that goes between my starting tag and my end tag goes here. So this is sort of your like placeholder for like, they're gonna put something in here, just put it there, right? That's what a slot is for. Now, you can name slots so that you can have multiple of them. For instance, if you want to have a title and you want to have content, you could have like your default slot, which is just a slot tag, be your content. And then you can be like slot name equals title, be your title, and that can go in your H2 tag, H1 tag, whatever you want. And then when you want to use it, you just say, oh, okay, cool, here's a span, and it is slot title, and that text will end up inside of your H1. Very handy. Not going to go too deep into that too much. Already did. All right, so the next interesting part is the actual styling that we're going to do here. So like I said, we're making a blink tag. It is going to blink. And there's some weird stuff going on in here. This is some weird CSS. So let's talk through some of this, shall we? The first line in there, let's see if I can make this work. Oh, I can, sweet. The first line in there, we have :host. So :host, once again, is a special CSS selector that is only used in Shadow DOM. It allows you to say, hey, the thing that's the wrapper for this, right? The element that is containing all of this stuff, apply styles to that, right? So I'm saying when you put in our blink tag that we want, apply styles to that element. And so the styles that we are applying are font size inherit, because we want to make sure that we get the right, whatever font size is cascading through. And line height, we also want it to cascade through. Then we're next styling our slot here, right? And so once again, that's our slot element. And we're saying, hey, that slot, it's going to animate. Over a period of 2 seconds, it's going to have the condemned blink effect. And then we define our keyframes for our condemned blink effect, which is basically like visibility, hidden, and then not hidden. So it's just blinking. And then I have a media query here for prefers reduced motion. Now my media query, I should probably actually make this a little bit better. But this is saying, hey, if somebody prefers reduced motion, then do this instead. And so for our slot, we're going to say animation none, because we don't want to animate it at that point. But I'm also applying a text shadow. Now I've made this special text shadow that kind of goes through the entire spectrum of the rainbow. So it doesn't matter what background you put it on, it just works. And all of your text will just sort of like have this weird glow to it. And it's great because it still like shows that your blink tag is doing something for people. So like visually, people can still say, hey, this is doing something, but it's not like interrupting their stuff. And then the final thing that we're going to do here is we're going to say this.shadowRoot, which is a property that is created when you say this.attachShadow mode open. If you do mode closed, you don't get this.shadowRoot. You have to store a reference to the thing that attach shadow returns, right? So you'd need to be like const shadow root equals this.attach shadow mode closed. And we're going to append our style and our slot to our shadow root. So now we have a style element and we have a slot in our shadow DOM for our element. And then we are going to register our custom element. This is the final magic incantation that you need to use, which is custom elements .define the name of the tag that you want, which has to have a hyphen in it. That is key. If you attempt to do it without a hyphen, it won't work. It has to have at minimum 1 hyphen in there. And the reason for that is every single word that is a single word is reserved in HTML now. So in order to make your own tag, you need to put a hyphen in it. Usually, people prefix it with something. So in our case, we're going to do GE-blink for our GeoElements blink tag. And then we're going to pass it the class that we just made, GeoElements blink. Everybody get it? Make sense? Cool. So let's see that. And this is it in action. Now, when you use custom elements.define, what you are doing is that you are telling the browser, hey, when you see a tag that says my tag name, use this class. You don't have to wait for document, add event listener, on ready, like all of that stuff. We don't need to wait for page load. You just define this, and then the browser goes, I got you, and will eventually use the HTML element that you have defined. So now we have our blink tag. It's working great there. And I'll show you the accessibility feature here that I've made. So I can emulate prefers reduced motion reduced. And when you do that, boop, it has a text shadow on it that works on any background because it goes through the entire spectrum. And so yeah, it looks weird, but that's because it's in a blink tag. Cool. So that is our first example of a thing. So let's do a quick review and make sure that I didn't miss anything that I am supposed to explain. You create a new custom element by extending an HTML element. You always want to call super first in your constructor because that activates the HTML element. Use this .attach shadow to attach the shadow DOM. This .shadow root append will allow you to add things to the shadow DOM. Make sure to add a slot element to display any content that gets put between your two tags. Register your new element with window.customelements.define. Okay, cool. So let's talk about attributes. So far, we've made a tag that does one thing. Sometimes tags do different things. Now, there used to be, in HTML 3.2, the ability on the body tag to define BG color, background, as attributes. These allow you to define a background image. The background allows you to define a background image. BG color allows you to define a background color. And both of these technically still work on the body element. We're not supposed to use them though. It's bad form to use them. So let's make a background element so that we can use these again. So once again, we're going to make a new HTML element. We're going to extend our HTML element as we have done previously. But I have a new thing that is the first thing that I'm doing inside of this class so that other people can figure out later, oh, hey, this is what this class does, is that I have a new function. It is a static getter. And it is called observed attributes. So this is a way to define for our custom element, hey, I'm going to have some attributes, and I want to know when they change, right? I want to be able to do something when they change. So I'm telling it on background, BG color, and inline that it needs to do something. And specifically, this is a static getter, so it looks like a property on the class itself. You would access this by doing GeoElement background.observed attributes, as it is static, so you don't have to instantiate the object, and it is a getter, so we don't have to call it as a function, it's just a property. But that makes it read-only. You can't override this. These are what the things are. Next, we're going to have a magic function. This magic function is called attribute changed callback. So when you define a series of observed attributes, this is how you can do something when an attribute changes. Now, I have over-engineered this example a little bit for purposes of demonstration. I have 3 separate update functions depending on the attribute. So we have the name that we are switching on, which is the name of the attribute that has changed. And I'm giving it 3 different cases, background, BG color, inline, and each one updates a different thing, update image, update color, and update inline. You are also passed the old value and the new value in case you're needing to compare things. In my case, we don't. But because new value is the 3rd argument, you still have to hold a place for the old value. Then we're going to make our constructor. Now this looks very similar to what we did already in the last example. We have our constructor, we have our super call, we have this .attach shadow. But in this case, I am making 3 style elements and 1 slot. And I am appending all of our style elements and the slot to our shadow root. And the reason that I'm doing 3 separate style elements is because rather than attempting to update one style element with all of the attributes that I need anytime any attribute changes, I just want to update the one CSS property for the thing that I'm doing, right? So I'm going to have each one have its own style tag so that I can just be like, change the style on this one, change the style on that one. And then I'm going to go ahead and initialize our update image, update color, and update inline. Now, at this point, these won't do anything because the attributes can't be read in the constructor. You can't tell what the attributes are until the element is fully initialized, which we'll get to, don't worry. So we have a helper function called updateStyle, which basically says, okay, cool, give me the style element that I want, and then update the text content of it. So this is a helper. When I call updateStyle, that's all it's a helper that I made. Just know that for the future 3 things that we're looking at. So the first one is update image. And if there isn't a value, then the style that I want to update is the image style, and I want to make sure that it is empty. I don't want any styling in there, right? If I don't have an image, no styling. Don't need it. However, if there is something in there, then we want to set our background image to a URL, okay? And we set it to value, and then we can move on. So now our host element, right, will have a background image. Similarly with color, if it doesn't have a value, I want to set it to transparent because it doesn't have a color, so it's transparent. I want to see straight through it. But if there is a color, then we want to set background color. Now, inline is not an attribute that the body has, but I'm adding it here for utility and for usefulness, right? We're making things better. Inline, if inline has a value or is set, then it will make it, if it is not set, it'll make it a block that takes up the entire viewport, right? So imagine your body, you want to set the body background color. You want that to just take up the entire screen, right? That's what you're going for. We'll help along with that. However, if you set the value to inline, if you have the inline attribute, then it sets the display to be an inline block so that you can now add a background image to an H1, and it'll only be the space that the H1 is taking up, or a span, or whatever you want. And then finally, we invoke our GE background with GeoElement background, so now we have our custom tag. And yeah, that's it. So here's a demo of that. Now, I've made this demo a little bit more complicated. I've actually added some buttons that do things. So we have down here this nice big red block, and we have an inline. I can toggle it being inline, right? So this changes it from inline to not inline. We also have our background color, and I've used a nice little like color picker here that's built into the browser. And it automatically changes the color. This is great. So the attributes are now changing on update, right? As we update the attributes, the element itself is changing. So we're able to observe our attributes. So that is our background tag. Any questions before I go into a quick review to make sure I didn't forget anything? Lovely. All right. So, quick review. You use static get observed attributes and return an array of strings. And those strings are the attributes that you want to observe. Attribute changed callback will change things on when an observed attribute changes. That's it. That's all I got. So now we're going to make a marquee. So for those of you who don't know what a marquee tag, yes, this is a real marquee tag, by the way. There's actually 2 of them. You make it do the DVD bounce. What a marquee tag does is that at its simplest, basic non-attribute form has text start off screen, or outside of the edge of the marquee element, and then slowly scroll across the screen until all of the text is then off the screen. And then it starts again. And that is how a marquee element works. Now you can do this vertically, you can do this you can do this, from right to left to right, up to down to up. There's also like multiple modes that it works in. I've re-implemented this entire thing. It's really complicated. It's way more complicated than I thought it would be, and I'm still angry about it. So we're going to talk about marquee a little bit, though, because it's weird. Like, it's weird because it's a moving text, but like it's weirder than you think that it is, right? So this is a marquee tag, right? This is, you'd see it there. It's scrolling text across. There's a bunch of lorem ipsum. And it's just scrolling text. That's all it's doing. That's fine. However, the browser vendors that have implemented this, all of them, they don't keep their implementation up to date. So on newer features, it doesn't necessarily work the way that you expect it to, right? So for instance, here we have several lines of text. They all get strung out into one long piece of text, right? So when you put the text inside of a marquee tag into paragraph tags, because really that large amount of text should really be considered paragraphs for accessibility, semantics, all of that fun stuff, it makes multiple long strings of text, right? Okay. But like I said, the browser vendors haven't necessarily kept up their marquee implementation with newer features. For instance, who here knows about a thing called Flex, Display Flex, Flexbox? Yeah, got a few hands, good. Flexbox is a way to basically say, hey, I have this content. I want it to take up a certain amount of space, just like take up the whole space, but then split it up evenly. You figure out the math, right? I don't like math, you figure it out. And you can just do things in display row. You can also do things in display column. You can also do things in column reverse, where it takes the topmost element and puts it at the bottom. And then it does everything in reverse, right? Huh? Yeah? Cool. Guess what happens if you do display flex flow column reversed on a marquee tag? It doesn't work correctly. It displays things in the order that they are in the DOM, and that is because it doesn't. Like all of these, it should be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You are seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, Safari does this correctly. Firefox does not. Chrome doesn't. Old Edge used to, until they updated their engine to being Chromium. So, right, like we can make this better. Also, there's a new element called dialog. I'm not going to go into it too much. It's basically a built-in modal into the browser. You should look into it. It's super cool. Marquee doesn't work at all in that. Like it just straight up does not work. So yeah, like marquee is weird. And so we need to have a new marquee element that we can use safely and effectively and accessibly. The marquee element is actually very inaccessible. If you turn on prefers reduced motion, it just keeps on moving, which defeats the entire purpose. So we're going to make a simple marquee tag. Like I said, marquee is extremely complicated. There's a lot of bells and whistles and stuff like that. We're going to make one that has the text start all the way off to one side and slowly goes across the entire element until it's all the way off screen. That's all that we're going to do. I'm not going to even add like going in the opposite direction. We're not even going to try that. So let's make our simple marquee element. Once again, we start off with our same thing that we've done already before. We have our extending an HTML element, constructor, super, attach shadow, making a style element. Now, in this case, I'm actually going to create a div. And inside of that div, I'm going to put our slot. And the reason for this is that I need stuff to move from here over to here. And you cannot animate a slot element because it doesn't exist. It gets replaced by whatever content is inside of the thing. So you can't actually animate a slot element. So I am creating a div so that I can animate the div and therefore anything that's inside of it. All right. Next, we're going to have our style block. Once again, we're styling the host with inline block because it needs to be a block, it needs to be inline, it needs to be max width of 100%. We're going to have overflow hidden because we want things to start off the edge of it and not be seen, and end not being seen. We're going to have text align and white space no wrap. That's the magic one, right? That's the one that causes it to go really long. And then we're going to style our div very similarly. And then we're going to append all of this to our shadow root. And then the last thing that we're going to do is that we're going to use the Web Animation API, which is a very fancy way of saying doing CSS animations in JavaScript. And the reason for that is we need to do some math with JavaScript pixel values. And if you attempt to do math with JavaScript pixel values and put it into a CSS block, Safari doesn't like that. Discovered that one the other day. And it can't do the math correctly. So if you stay in JavaScript with your JavaScript measurements, everything works fine. So we're going to go, all right, we're going to start at the client width, which is the width of the marquee element that we're in. We're going to start there. We're going to translate x all the way over there. And then we're going to go to our scroll width of our div in the negative so that it goes all the way off screen, right? So we're starting here, ending here. It's going to take a magical, the amount of time it's going to take is a magical amount of time. This is a magic equation. There's a reason for it. I'm not going to explain it right now. Just know those are the defaults of marquee. It is correct, and it works. And then it's going to do this for forever. Cool. And we're going to then make our simple marquee element. So let's see a demo of that. Now, you'll notice on top, we have our working simple marquee. Yay! But you will notice below it, there is text. Now, why is there text? Well, let's take a look at this. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And underneath our definition of our thing, I've cleverly, very cleverly, created a new simple marquee element with JavaScript. And I've made it have similar text content, and then I have appended it to the body. And what is happening is, because we defined that animation in the constructor, the width of the scroll and the scroll width and the client width are both 0, because it is not in a document when it is created. Which means that we need a way to be able to get that width when it is put into the document so that we know what width it has. So there are 3 functions left that you need to know about for custom elements. One is called connected callback. Connected callback is your way of saying, hey, when you put this in the DOM, right, when this gets into the DOM, do something. Right? I have the measurements now, I'm in the DOM, I know what size I'm going to be, I need to do something. Or you're waiting for the document to be loaded, this is your friend, this is the one that you want. The other one is adopted callback. You will never use this. Whatever you make connected callback do, make adopted callback do, but you will never need this. The reason that you won't need this is that this gets called when you move a custom element from one document to another document, which means that you are passing an element from one frame into an iframe. It's so rare that you're ever going to need this. You need to define it, but you don't need to worry about it too much. And the last one that we need to know about, because we are all good net citizens and we all clean up after ourselves whenever we make anything and we don't have any memory leaks whatsoever, is our disconnected callback. When it gets removed from the DOM, what do you do? How do we clean up after ourselves? So let's fix our simple marquee. So this starts off very similarly to what we've already seen. We are going to have like the first part with all of our styles and everything like that. We do everything up to where I made the animation. So we go all the way down to where we append everything to the shadow root. And previously, I had created an animation here. Instead, I'm going to create a new property called current animation equals null. This is a way for us to track if we have an animation currently. Then I'm going to make a function called start animation. So with start animation, we're going to check to see if we have a current animation. And if we do, cancel it, right? Don't need that anymore. And then we're going to make a new animation, and it is going to take the client width, and it's going to move everything off to the scroll width of the div. And then we have our magic equation, and we're going to do this for forever, or until it gets canceled. Then we're going to have our connected callback, which calls this.start animation. And we're going to have our adopted callback, which calls this.start animation. Never used it. I genuinely have never used adopted callback. And then we're going to be good net citizens, and we're going to clean up after ourselves because we're responsible, all of us in this room and theaters. And we're going to have our disconnected callback, and we're going to make sure that the animation gets canceled so that everything can get garbage collected correctly. And then we're going to define our, and then we're defining our element. So here it is, working the exact same thing that we did before, only now, when the element is inserted into the DOM, it actually animates correctly. So let's review. We use the connected callback method to handle being added to the DOM. We use the adopted callback method to handle being moved from one document to another. You're never going to use that. And then you're going to have disconnected callback for cleaning things up, making sure that you don't have any stragglers anywhere. So, in conclusion, these are custom elements. They work in most normal browsers. Will you use this API? Yes. Will you use this API directly? Probably not. My recommendation is, and this is going against everything that we literally just talked about for the last 40 minutes, is use a framework. This is really like overly complex stuff. Like you're having to like create elements in JavaScript. There's such nicer ways of doing it that do not add much overhead. Svelte, anybody here of Svelte? Anybody here like Svelte? Svelte, you can take your Svelte components, turn them into custom elements. Anybody here like Vue? Anybody here like Vue? Yeah, I got a couple of people. I got a couple of hands. Good on that one. Yeah, yeah. Vue, you can take Vue components in Vue 3, turn them into custom elements. React, anybody here like React? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, can't help you. Maybe in future versions, maybe. But there are other frameworks that allow you to write this without having to go through the like obnoxious stuff that we just did. So with that, my conclusion is use things so that the web is fun. Also make sure that with everything that you do, the web should be accessible. We made sure that our examples were more accessible. And finally, just go make dumb stuff, right? Like, but when you make dumb stuff, make sure that you make dumb stuff for everyone, because you don't want to be left out of the joke, right? So, thank you. Does anybody have any questions about anything custom element related? Because there's a bunch of stuff I didn't cover. Yeah, so custom elements work in Safari. They work fine in Safari. There is an API for being able to extend a native element. So for instance, I want a paragraph tag, but I want a better paragraph tag, right? It'd be called like better-p or something like that, I don't know. There is a way to do that. There's a standard for that. You would go p, like paragraph tag, is equals better-p, right? And there is a way to extend those elements so that you can do things and like modify them and make them your own thing. Safari doesn't support that at all. No support for that, which is why I don't cover it here, because I'm like, it's not something that it does. But everything else, everything that I've just covered works in everything except for Internet Explorer, which once again. So, yeah. Any other questions? I'm cool with being done. Yes?
Do you have an example of something that you've done with a web component on like a real website, not like a...
Yeah. So the question was, do I have an example of like using web components in real life, like a real production example? Perfect example. Salesforce Lightning Web Components. Their entire library is custom elements. Salesforce is using this in production for everything that they do. So I think that they're building it with a library. I don't remember what they're using to actually build it, but they have a framework behind it, and that is how they're building it. But it's leveraging custom elements. It's not a React app. It's not a Vue app. It's not a Svelte app. It is native JavaScript stuff that works. And so, and the nice thing about custom elements too, and I didn't really cover this, I should probably cover this, is these do work in any framework, right? You can take a custom element, go put it in Vue, go put it in Svelte. You can kind of do it in React. It's not great. But like it's one of those where like you can take a custom element, use it in React, and it'll just work. You just, instead of like importing something and then like saying, here's the thing, you just use the tag name and it'll do its thing. It'll treat it like it's a paragraph tag or a whatever. So yeah, so there's that. That I don't know, because Google does a lot of interesting things, and I don't know. Because they have Angular, but then I don't know what they're using for other stuff. So it may be, I haven't looked. Gmail may be another example, but I don't have concrete proof of that, so I'm not going to say that one. Yes? So the question was, are there any security concerns with these web elements? I mean, as with anything, if you are using somebody else's library, you need to make sure that you are vetting it, right? Like that's not like anything coming off of NPM is like potentially a security vulnerability. But similarly with any packaging manager, right? Like make sure that you're checking your dependencies, you're keeping things up to date. That being said, because web components are basically as secure as whatever browser you're using, right? They're sandboxed in some ways a little bit extra than other things, like you can't necessarily do stuff with it. But yeah, I mean, they're as secure as any other like outside library that you would use. So there's not anything where it's like, oh yes, and when you use web components, it opens up an extra port on your computer that then like phones in all of your private information to whatever, right? Like it's not, nothing like that. The most interesting one that I've seen recently is there's a WebAssembly implementation of Python called Pyodide. And so somebody was like, hey, what if we take this WebAssembly implementation of Pyodide and we wrap it in a custom element, and then you can just put py-script in a page, and then you just type in Python and it'll work. It was very interesting. That came out like a week ago at PyCon. So there are interesting things that you can do with it because it's its own thing. Anyone else? Did that answer your question effectively? Okay, cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your conference.